Good afternoon. My name is Guillermo Patino, the chairperson designee of the New York City Loft Board. Welcome to our April 20, 2023 public meeting. Section 282 of the New York State Multiple Dwelling Law establishes the New York City Loft Board. The board is charged with overseeing the legalization of inter-multiple dwelling units from commercial and manufacturing spaces to legal residential units that comply with the minimum standards of safety and fire protection in Article 7B of the New York State Multiple Dwelling Law. To achieve this goal, the board adjudicates and mediates disputes between owners and tenants, tracks the progress of legalization, and prosecutes parties who violate the loft law and the loft board's rules. We'll first turn to a vote on the minutes from the March 2023 public meeting. Are there any corrections or comments to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hilton. Is there a second? Thank you. Ms. Rivera, can you please pull the board members?
Mr. Ballard?
Yes.
Mr. Roach?
Yes.
Mr. Hilton?
Yes.
Mr. Delaney?
Yes.
Ms. Roseland?
Yes.
Ms. Otto?
Abstain?
Ms. Rajan?
Yes.
Chairperson Patino?
Yes.
7 in favor, 1 abstain.
Thank you. So next on the agenda is the report of our executive director.
Good afternoon. We received 2 decisions since the March meeting. The first decision involved 476 Jefferson Street in Brooklyn and the owner's challenge to order numbers 4995, which granted protected occupancy status, and order number 5053, which denied reconsideration. The appellate division upheld the Loft Board's rejection of the owner's claim that the unit was deregulated by sale of rights. The court found that the owner failed to demonstrate that the former tenant knew about their protected occupancy status and that the transaction was a knowing sale of rights. The second decision involved 13 East 17th Street and the owner's challenge to order numbers 4938, a removal order that set the initial legal regulated rents for several units. In this case, the owner sought a temporary restraining order against the Loft Board. In a decision dated April 6, the court denied the petition without prejudice based on the owner's withdrawal of the motion and the petition. In this case, the owner has refiled the petition. The website. The staff has been discussing ways to improve the website. If any board member has any ideas or comments that they want to contribute, it would be welcome to do that now. Please send me an email, and we will talk about it. Right now, because there have been so many questions about our rules and the law, we plan to add a link right now on the home page to the rules. You're saying it's there?
Mm-hmm.
The amended rules or the entire?
The one that Stefan's going to post.
The link to American Legal.
Oh, that's already there? Look at that. You're ahead of me. Yeah. Okay. The next thing I'd like to report about is the staff will be meeting with Loft Law Architects next week. We started this last year. We find them to be good information about the process, about their dealings with DOB, and we've come to some degree of back and forth about the process and about how we can help if we can. Lastly, the buildings list. I'm working on it. I'm going through it. I'm checking, status, legalization status, meaning the full milestones, application filed or not filed, whether they pulled a permit or completed the narrative, or whether they're 7B compliant or whether they've obtained the C of O. If there are no questions for me, I'll turn it over to Mr. Clark about, he's going to talk about the fact sheets that you received in your materials.
I have some questions, but I think I'll wait till after all if you'll permit me, I'd like to wait till after all the reports, because I'm sure some of them can be answered in the course of that.
Thank you, Executive Director. Good afternoon, board members. In addition to working on the website, we are also working on creating fact sheets that provide overviews and information about specific areas and functions of the Loft Board. Our intern Lucy has done an amazing job with the design of the fact sheets. We created the first 2 fact sheets and sent them with the board meeting materials last week. We will also be placing them up on our website. The first fact sheet is named Loft Law and Loft Law Coverage. This fact sheet provides information about the history of the loft law, the criteria for Article 7C coverage of the building and units, and how tenants and owners can seek coverage. The second fact sheet is named Loft Board, composition, duties, regulatory authority, and staff. This fact sheet provides information about the makeup of the board and the board's duties and responsibilities. It also includes information about Title 29 of the Rules of the City of New York, also known as the Loft Board's Rules. Finally, this fact sheet includes information about the Loft Board's amazing staff and our contact information. Hopefully everybody had an opportunity to look at the first 2 fact sheets, and I'm not sure if we should reserve any comments for it till later, or if anybody has any comments on the first 2 fact sheets, we can take them down.
I have a couple. First off, I think these are great, and I take it these are not tentative drafts. These are kind of ready to go.
Yes.
Have they gone, or are they?
No.
Going back to the mention of the fact that you're also working on the website, based on Ms. Roslind's suggestion last month, I took a look at the Department of City Planning's website, and it is so much better than the standard do-it template. That, I mean, and Fire has a nice website, but can we, do you have to be a bigger agency to get that kind of thing that city planning has got going?
We'll discuss it internally.
We can check, but I believe that most agencies have to comply with the standard template.
The ugly do-it template.
You said that.
It is. It's like, it's just moving backwards. Onto the fact sheets, I just have a couple suggestions. One is that, in fact sheet number 1, how to obtain coverage. First off, getting all this on one page is a remarkable accomplishment. The point size is a little small, but I know how that works. It's readable. The one thing that struck me was missing on the first one is it talks about for a tenant seeking coverage and the fee for the tenant-initiated coverage application, but it kind of leaves out that you probably need a concurrent protected occupant application. So I would just look to see if you can weave that in.
Okay.
On the second one, regulatory authority, section 3, regulatory authority. I think at the end of chapter 2, it includes the board's substantive rules. It might make sense to just note that in 2023, the board made extensive amendments to its rules so that people who may be reading this who last looked at the rules 5 years ago should know this is changed. And 2 paragraphs down, parties are not required to hire a lawyer but may choose to do so. It seemed to me like maybe that wanted to say something along the lines of parties are not required to hire a lawyer to file an application or to do something, rather than just, I gotta have a lawyer. And lastly, down at the bottom on that column where we talk about the board staff processes FOIL requests, if you can wedge it in, how to file would be.
Yeah, I actually, I added that in there.
Yeah.
The email address to submit a FOIL
Good.
request.
Okay.
That's a good catch.
And what else is planned for the series?
I'm going to get into that. Are there any other questions? And I'll complete the report. So, we are working on our 3rd fact sheet right now. We tried to get it in before this meeting, but it's probably the most extensive fact sheet. It's for the narrative statement process. This fact sheet will have an overview of the process. It breaks down each step of the narrative statement process and provides information on what tenants and owners can expect during each step. These steps include filing the narrative statement, scheduling, preparing for, and attending the narrative statement conference, providing tenants with an opportunity to file comments or an alternate plan, also known as starting the clock, dispute resolution proceedings, Loft Board certification, and amendments to the narrative statement. We are deciding if we want to split this fact sheet into two separate parts, one for owners and architects, and the second for the tenants. Other fact sheets we are considering include rent milestone increases, code compliance, sales of rights, access, loanos, certifications, and finally, maintenance and minimum standards. We are open to suggestions for additional fact sheets, as we believe they will be a powerful source of information readily available for the public. Are there any comments or questions? I think I got your question.
But would you say together, what is it, one for owners and tenants and the other for the public?
No, for the narrative statement, we're thinking about splitting it up to two parts. One version for owners and architects,
Or an architect?
yeah, and the other version for the tenants.
How long did it take you to put this one together, these two, each one?
Well,
Yeah.
No, I'm sure, I guess I'm, so I'm like counting off how many subjects you just covered, and it's like, well, if there's like, can you do 2 a month, and then that's, 6 months down the road, we're done, or?
We could probably do a little bit more, but it does take a lot of work though. So, we'll try to complete this sooner rather than later.
Sure. No, that's great. I can imagine there are a lot of work. It's a multi-step thing, right? First, what is the content? How do you describe the content in a way that it'll fit in a third of a column of a page, right? How do you distill it down to the essence, and then all of that? It's good.
Sorry, I missed, how are the fact sheets being sent out, or how do people see them again?
So we're going to put them up on our website.
On the website?
Yeah, so if any of you have ideas on where we should put them up on our website, one of the things that I was speaking with the executive director about is we already have some information on our website, and I kind of don't want to be redundant. So, that is something that's in the air, and if all of you take a look at our website and can probably weigh in and give us suggestions on where we should place some of this information.
Will they be PDFs that people can download?
Yes.
Not a page?
No, there will be PDFs. People can download.
So
Hyperlinks.
I just wonder how we can get the most broad circulation of this. The way to do it is for the city of New York to take out a full-page example of it in the New York Times, which you see periodically.
Excellent idea.
No, I mean, it's up to us.
I don't have it in it in New York Times, but
I know.
we can try.
Everyone has some good connections.
Who runs the electric billboard down in Times Square?
Well, actually, when we were talking a little bit last month about the general public ignorance about the loft law, and maybe if you're looking for a news item that might interest at least some downtown newspapers and the Brooklyn paper and some of those, forgive me for being crude, but after 40 years of not having thought of a pretty elemental step, the Loft Board has finally seen the light and issued a series of 8 or 10 fact sheets that demystify the workings of the Loft Board for the general public. That would probably get a few inches of space and, patch and, the various local downtown Tribeca trim, et cetera.
One suggestion I might make is that the fire department deals rather heavily with all the libraries in the city. And all the libraries in the city typically have some sort of fact area, pick up literature for other city agencies, et cetera, et cetera. I would encourage us to maybe develop relationships there and make these fact sheets available at the various libraries throughout the city. Probably also the community boards. If we could solicit them at no cost, obviously, to the community boards. The community boards would probably be another location to develop relationships with that could have the work, have the fact sheets available.
The subway.
But just to go back to the Department of City Planning, the homepage, it's like, it's got a couple of buttons like, why are you here? What are you looking for, with a drop down? It's very easy to navigate. It's so much better. Self-censor, I'm self-filtering. Just want you to know I haven't lost that ability.
I like the discussion about how to make people aware that we even exist, because these sheets are great, but I'm like, if nobody even knows to go to the website, then it will languish there, and I think if more people knew that potentially this might be something that's applicable to them, then it might even just prompt them to go to the website, not even about the fact sheets, and then, just to try to get them to.
Yeah, I think the community board outreach is a great idea, because a lot of people go to their community board when there's an issue, and they then can direct someone.
There's also, and forgive me, ever since we've gone to a virtual forum, I've forgotten names and everything else, but there's a really active group within the Loft Board community that used to attend very regularly, and I'm sure they're attending actually right now.
They're watching.
We just can't see.
They're watching.
But I think they had events periodically throughout their calendar year that we could possibly partner with them to just make the literature available.
I think some people may call 311 with this, so I don't know if you're able to see the resources that the 311 operators have, because somebody just calls and he's like, my rent, maybe they're able to at least direct that person to the website, like without having to give a response. But sometimes the operators have very specific resources that they could look to, and maybe it's worth checking if they know that we exist.
This is a bit off topic, but maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, there was somebody in, I think, the Giuliani administration of some prominence who had padded their expense account with some expenses attributed to the Loft Board. And the press was all of a sudden like, what's this? What's the Loft Board? It had no interest in the substance of the Loft Board's activity. But the whiff of scandal was the last time I think the general press was wondering about the Loft or the Loft Board.
My indication would be if we're staying out of the press, we're probably doing a good job.
Exactly.
No scandals, yes.
No, but it was my son that made that notice apparent that Giuliani was using Loft Board funds to go see his lady friend in Long Island.
I think we came up with a couple of good ones there, though.
Yeah.
The Loft Association group,
Sure.
community boards are fantastic, and I think the libraries would run, a third or fourth into that top group.
311.
And 311.
That's a good suggestion. So before we leave this topic, coming back to Mr. Delaney's comment about the last line under regulatory authority. This seems so minor after what we just talked about. Does that sentence belong there at all? It isn't about, it's just about us. The rest of the paragraph, the rest of the section.
Right.
Right, we can add it over here, try to fit it in the other page, where we talk about applications for coverage. Okay.
Or other fact sheets. where it
Yeah.
might be more.
Yeah.
I have that on the narrative statement. Fact sheet.
Because there is nothing actually in that section that someone would hire a lawyer.
That's true,
Yeah.
yes.
Huh? Flow chart. That, you can find a good flow chart. DOB has a good flow chart on their website.
Okay, if there are no further comments or questions, I will turn it over to Ms. Renee Story, our enforcement attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. We are focusing on 3 areas of enforcement: reasonable and necessary, building registration, and legalization reports. Under the reasonable and necessary enforcement, we have issued a total of 79 violations. Of those 79 violations, 35 administrative determinations have been issued. 5 owners have paid their penalty. 30 owners have not paid. We have issued 23 notices of withdrawals. These withdrawals have been due to compliance. The owners are actually listening and trying to comply, and some due to service issues. There are 21 remaining administrative determinations to be issued. We are giving the owners time to cure the violation. Next, under building registration enforcement, there are 13 owners that are still delinquent with annual registration from last fiscal year. There are, our new fiscal year begins on July 1st, 2023. We will be sending out registration packets within the last 2 weeks of June. So if anyone does not receive their packet by July 4th, please reach out to the Loft Board. Our address is 280 Broadway, first floor, New York, New York, 10007. And you can also call us at 212-393-2616. Under legalization report enforcement, all IMD buildings without a certificate of occupancy must file legalization reports. We have 323 buildings in our jurisdiction. We have received approximately 88 reports for the month of April. Initially, there was some confusion with the form, with where to send the form and what was needed on the form. So let me address all of those. First, the updated form is on our website, so there's no more technical difficulties. Second, the legalization report is due 4 times a year: April 1st, July 1st, October 1st, and January 1st. Each report must contain legalization progress for the preceding 3 months. For example, April should contain legalization progress for January, February, and March. The form must be signed by the owner and the architect, and you must use the correct form. Please do not send us any emails, letters, or anything other than the form that we have on the website. We have also addressed the issue with regards to where to send the form. We have created a special inbox for these reports. Please send the form to loftboardquarterly@buildings.nyc.gov. We are looking to start enforcement on all legalization reports starting in July. Lastly, we have met with 3 owners concerning legalization and other enforcement matters. We are open to meeting with other owners regarding legalization, so please feel free to reach out to the law board. Thank you. Is there any questions? Thank you, guys.
Very good.
No questions? Go ahead, James.
Happy birthday, Jane.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Good afternoon, board members. Since last month's report on the status of buildings that are in what we refer to as the open narrative statement milestone of buildings under our jurisdiction, I'd like to present some update statistics of those buildings. In the last month, as always, several buildings have moved along in the legalization process. They have submitted new narrative statement filings. We have scheduled narrative statement conferences for them. We've issued several certifications, some of which were initial certifications and some of which were subsequent certifications. Several notices of opportunity to comment had ended, and we have followed up on several buildings that were inactive for some time. The number of buildings in the stage has decreased from March due to certifications that were issued, where the onus is now on ownership to pull a permit and commence legalization work. To more accurately capture the state of play, we created a new category for inactive buildings that has some from other categories moved into it. Several of these buildings stalled in the process for a multitude of reasons, frequently not being held accountable for continuing to move forward. As mentioned, we are moving forward and holding many of these buildings accountable on a case-by-case basis and continue to do so. Some of these statistics, a copy of which is in front of each of you, are that there are 53 buildings now in this category, 5 of which have submitted incomplete narrative statements, 3 of which have upcoming narrative statement conferences, 13 buildings where the owner is currently working on revising plans and or working with the Department of Buildings. There are 4 buildings for which a notice of opportunity to comment are currently ongoing. There are 6 buildings where certifications must be evaluated by the loft board before they can be issued. And there are 19 buildings that have been inactive where the loft board will be following up after past inactivity. Although I've mentioned this before, although legalization of all these buildings, under loft board jurisdiction are important, we will be concentrating loft board resources on reaching out to these inactive buildings to hold them accountable for legalizing. Some had owners and tenants working together for several years until the loft board stopped receiving updates. Others did not receive certifications for various reasons. And we will have to come up with case-by-case solutions to get these buildings to the finish line, utilizing our entire toolbox, including enforcement if necessary. Are there any questions?
Just a couple. Thank you, this is very helpful. I think it would be more helpful, I have a feeling we're going to see a report like this every month, or fairly regularly. It would be helpful to have a date on it, either the date of the meeting or the date that you compiled.
For sure, thank you. I actually had that on a previous version, but thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, and the significantly large number, more than a third of the ones you're tracking, past inactivity by the parties. I mean, principally that's the owner and his professionals, and their professionals.
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question, and that's one that I've been trying to sort of figure out. Important caveat is that it is, we say this a lot, but every building is its own story, and it's hard for me as someone who's in the weeds to necessarily sort of zoom out and see what is happening with this category. So in some situations, yes, that is the case. It is ownership that hasn't pushed it along, but there are, of course, different parties in the process, which is why I mentioned that there are certain situations where owners and tenants had been negotiating or discussing, and frequently, sometimes it's either side that perhaps it was as simple as had to get back to the other side on, hey, this is how we'd like to implement this. Here's a copy of our plans or a markup or something that perhaps was never done. And so, to be frank, there are certain situations where it's the loft board that perhaps could have done more to ensure that that was done. But that's why, as I said, it's a big story as for who is exactly liable in these situations, and blame isn't necessarily one that we like to assign because we're trying to keep this as collaborative as is possible, and we're trying to, push these buildings to the finish line. But going forward, as we have already, owners as well as tenant representatives will be hearing from us on buildings they may not have worked on for several years, but should expect to do so soon.
Thank you.
No problem.
Right, as a follow-up, what is the criteria you're using to categorize something as an inactive building? I mean, it came up in a couple of the cases today, right? Like that there are some buildings that have been sort of slowly slogging through the process for 25 years or something, and others where literally nothing has happened in like 5 years. So is it a month, 5 months, a year that nothing's happened, or is it that they've consistently missed their milestone deadlines, or is it what?
Yeah, it's I would say without painting with too broad a brush, that I think that it's buildings that we haven't heard anything from regarding legalization work for at least a year, frequently for several years. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I think we have to remember that right now we're dealing with a group of buildings that are in the process. So either they haven't had a conference in quite some time, they haven't, the last conference, perhaps the owner was supposed to revise the plan and we haven't received it. Perhaps, I don't know, do you have any that we were supposed to issue a clock and we didn't?
Sure.
Or,
So there seems to be some stumbling block. The
there's
process started and then for some reason it stopped.
for a multitude of reasons. So just the passage of time is how you got into this category.
It is frequently easier, all of the other buildings in the other categories to reach legalization once they've already started and there's some momentum going, so to speak, after an average statement has been filed. And for most of these buildings, there's no momentum currently going that you can observe.
I mean, one of the things that we try to do, what James is doing, is that after every conference, like they sit down and talk about dates. What are we doing next? Who's responsible for what? Everyone is responsible for doing, who's doing the next step. Exactly, the action plan. And then James writes a follow-up email. And then writes another email. Be sure everybody stays honest.
Well, now, Gmail gives you the little, I don't know if it's good, but always if you send something out and then it pops up, it's been 5 days since you sent that, do you want to follow up? Like, I just knew. That's what I need.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to,
Oh, okay.
yeah, now that we've gotten through the reports. With regard to Ms. Story's report, it reminds me that we had a case last month where there had been a change of ownership, and we accepted a filing from the prior owner, even though theoretically the prior owner was no longer the owner. And I just, at the time, I remember commenting and people agreeing that this is an issue, and I'm just wondering if there's any way that enforcement can be more active in making sure that ownership is kept up to date.
Well,
The ownership information.
Yeah.
That we have,
Date
yeah.
Right.
in the
Yeah.
documents,
I mean,
the
the-
files.
That is a very good suggestion, and we also came to that conclusion a little while ago. What we're planning or anticipating to do when we send out the registration packets, we're gonna also send out forms to allow them to update it if they need to, the ownership information. We're gonna also make it very clear that if they're updating the ownership information, we need the accompanying deed to make sure everything is accurate.
Would it make sense, because I know we're just dying to get back to rulemaking, would it make sense to have some sort of provision in our rules that a change in ownership has to be filed within X number of days?
I believe we do. Yes, sir.
What is our,
5 days,
5 days, and what's the consequence?
a fine.
A $4,000
It's
fine?
4,000?
Yeah, very big fine. And there's no cure period, so a straight fine.
But how do you know?
That's the problem.
Yeah,
So we know when they file it. So if they don't file it within the 30 days or within the 5 days that it's, I remember it's 5 or 35, but it doesn't matter. The person who actually tells us is the person we're finding. So if they tell us, let's say, and it's within the 5 days, great, but if it's not within the 5 days, then we're finding someone who's told us that the ownership has changed. Versus the person who hasn't filed it with us is still out there. So unless we're going in accurate, every month, or, yeah, that, but
accurate?
yeah,
Yeah, okay.
for 300 and something buildings.
323 to be exact.
As I'm going through the buildings list right now to look for legalization, it's pretty painful. I mean, having to, because I'm not, I would only have to check accuracy, but as I'm going through this buildings list, I have to check 2 systems.
At least.
Yeah, DOB Now and Biz, it's 300 and something buildings.
Seems like AI should be able to help.
Like, there's no CSV file you can download and like look up against each other.
Summer's coming up, we can hire.
And what we found is that once we mail out the registrations, for those that come back to us, certainly we're going in and checking. But if the notice does not come back to us, then we have no way of knowing that there's been a change unless we go in and do the investigation.
Yeah, do, like, look up.
You gonna say something? No, Mr. Delaney?
On this topic, no, although I don't recall us ever having levied that fine.
No, I don't think we ever have, and it would be something that the board would do. We do it as notice of violation.
Okay, all right. So I have a few other questions that are generated by the minutes. And principally, let's talk about it's now April 20th, in addition to being Mr. Kim's birthday, that means the new rules have now been in effect for almost 3 weeks. I gather that American Legal Publishing, or whoever it is that their name?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, has the deal, that they've matched all the rules,
Yes.
and I'm confident that you'll be delivering Elliot and me with a hard copy as we requested
Yes, yes.
sometime in the not too distant future. One of the things we're going to do is now start posting proposed orders on the website. Is that, are we ready to, will that happen for May?
They're here, they happen for April.
They happen for April?
Yes.
If I'd gone to that ugly website of ours and looked, I might have been able to find them?
You would have been able.
You would have seen them.
Okay.
They're there.
And we had a case today where the owner submitted a 286, evidence of a 286-12 sale with all the sales figures obscured. And I know one of the things that was in our revisions is that we're not going to accept those going forward. Have we put that into motion?
Yes. I have already received a few, and I have them in my office because we're going to check them.
You haven't checked whether or not they contain the information that's now required?
No, I know that they don't.
Oh, these are ones that,
Yes,
I
Where the information is redacted.
yes, so those will be returned.
so just, I don't think we thought this through, or at least I certainly didn't. I executed the form with my tenant a year ago, but now I want to submit it. Does it require that information, or is it only for sales that take place or are purported to have taken place after April 1st?
If you file, well, my position is that if you file it today, the rule's in effect as of today. If you did this sale 3 months ago,
Or 3 years
or
ago?
3 years ago, you're supposed to file it within 30 days.
So you'll get a fine for that, but
Yes.
you can still reject your filing.
I smell an administrative determination.
You will get the appeal.
Okay. Okay, I think that covers my question. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. So we'll now turn to a vote on the cases on the calendar. There is one case on the appeal calendar. The case is 394-400 South 2nd Street in Brooklyn, docket number AD0109, and Mr. Kim will present this case.
Thank you, Chairperson. On August 21st, 2020, tenants filed an appeal application challenging an administrative determination issued by the acting executive director, finding that the building was exempt from the narrative statement process pursuant to 29 Rules of the City of New York, Section 2-01, subsection D23A. Section D-01, subsection D23A, provides an exemption from the narrative statement process if two conditions are satisfied. First, if a building permit for Article 7B compliance was issued on or before June 1st, 2012. Second, the building permit remains in effect or is renewed without reinstatement or amendment of the underlying alteration application and legalization plan until the owner obtains the residential certificate of occupancy for the IMD units. Although owner obtained a permit on February 11, 2011, prior to June 1st, 2012, tenants argued that the permit lapsed for more than a year in 2014 to 2015, and pursuant to a Department of Buildings service notice dated in March 2015, the permit should have been reinstated, not renewed. However, the Department of Buildings utilized its discretion in granting renewal of the permit without reinstatement. Second, the Loft Board rule requires amendment to both the underlying alteration application and legalization plan. The administrative determination did not err in finding that the alteration application was amended by post-approval amendment filed on September 23rd, 2019, but the legalization plan was not amended. Therefore, the proposed order before you finds that the administrative determination properly found that the building was exempt from the narrative statement process pursuant to 29 Rules of the City of New York, Section 2-01, subsection D23A, and denies the appeal.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Does anyone have any comments on this case?
Go ahead.
Just a technical comment. So we were talking earlier about the difference between the renewal and the reinstatement. And on page 3, under the permit was renewed without reinstatement, in the second paragraph it says, DOB's decision to renew the permit without reinstatement of the alteration application. And so, but in other places it's stated as reinstatement of the permit, which are two different things. Right, the permit's not being reinstated, they're required to be reinstatement, it's the application. So there's just two you need to do, sorry, I just lost it. In this case, DOB did not require reinstatement of the permit.
What page are you on?
On page 3, just in that section under analysis 1, the permit was renewed without reinstatement. In one sentence, it says that you're reinstating the permit, and in the next sentence, it says you're reinstating the application.
Yes, so we will change that permit to application. Right?
Yeah.
That would cure it, yes. Okay, so that's on page 3. That would be here.
Where are we? Excuse me, where are we?
Page 3, under 1, second paragraph, where it says, however,
Just above the middle of the page.
yes, it says tenants misunderstand the language in the service notice. The language is that reinstatement may be required. It is not absolute. In this case, DOB did not require reinstatement of the application. Okay.
Do you have additional comments, Mr. Delaney?
Yeah, I'm troubled by this case, and I find that given that the loft law is intended to be a remedial statute, I think the narrative statement conference is an important and very helpful step in the process. And this paragraph that, excuse me, that Ms. Roslin has been looking at really goes to the heart of tenants misunderstand the language in the service notice. The language is that reinstatement may be required, it is not an absolute. It seems to me we spent all that time with the language police stressing the may means shall. So I looked at the language that's relied on in the City Administrative Code 28-104.2.3, and I find it confusing, and it seems to me the Department of Buildings has leeway that they should be exercising in the opposite direction to encourage a step that's helpful to both the owners and the tenants. Hopefully the owner and the tenants will find a way to work through this, but I think the Department of Buildings has discretion and should exercise that discretion in a different way than it seems to in this case. Therefore, I'm going to vote no.
Well, and/or when we were reading through the language, it was there was a DOB's discretion to extend or to provide an extension, which didn't happen. So procedurally, they didn't give the applicant an extension, they just extended it.
We don't know if they did.
We don't know if they
We
did.
don't know if they did.
Oh,
We're not, the decision is within the department's discretion. We can't look behind the decision.
Right, and I know that a couple of years ago, the Loft Board spent some time meeting with plans examiners, as I recall, and certain things were hashed out, maybe greater understandings of situations were achieved. And I think this is an area where, to be honest, on the part of the Department of Buildings, I see mostly smoke and mirrors here rather than, oh, that makes sense. I see why this has definitely got to be this way. And I think the narrative statement conference, when in doubt, it should be held rather than evaded on something that seems kind of hard to follow. So I'm hoping the poobahs and the Department of Buildings will rethink their mindset.
We could just rule.
Or we could change the rule. Well, that's not going to help the certain tenants at 400 South 2nd Street. Hopefully, and again, if the tenants, as I said in the private session, if the tenants want to be difficult, deny access, it'll just be a bigger headache for everybody. And here we have a forum to resolve disputes. The purpose of the loft law, the purpose of the Loft Board is to resolve disputes. But in this case, the forum is not available. It just seems the wrong conclusion. I like the idea of changing the rules.
That we have control over.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Is there a motion to accept this case?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hilton. Is there a second?
I can second.
Thank you, Ms. Rajan. Ms. Rivera, can you please poll the board members?
Mr. Bowers?
Abstain.
Mr. Roach?
Yes.
Mr. Hilton?
Yes.
Mr. Delaney?
No.
Ms. Roseman?
Yes.
Ms. Otto? Chairperson Patino?
Yes.
5 in favor, 1 against, 2 abstain.
Thank you. So next are the cases on the summary calendar. There are 4 proposed orders on the summary calendar that involve 9 cases. We usually vote on these cases as a block. The cases are 517, 525 West 45th Street, docket number LS 0287, TM 0011, 8795 Dobbin Street in Brooklyn, docket numbers PO 0109 and TA 0262. 1083, 1095 Flushing Avenue in Brooklyn, docket numbers PO 0195, TA 0299, and 435 Broadway in Brooklyn, docket numbers TR 1465, TR 1466, and PO 0215. Are there any comments on these cases?
I have one comment, only because Mr. Roach last month pointed out that I did not notice the year was wrong. And since the chairperson goes to the trouble of reading all the bloody docket numbers, and case number 2, 517, 525 West 45th Street, it's actually TM 0111, but not 00. Is
111.
Yeah, it's 111. Because I thought, wow, there have only been 11 of those? Yeah.
We were testing you, Mr. Delaney. So you passed.
Okay, that's it.
Is there a motion to accept these cases?
I move.
Thank you, Ms. Rajan.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Roche. Ms. Rivera, can you please pull the board members?
Mr. Bowers?
Yes.
Mr. Roach?
Yes.
Mr. Hilton,
Yes.
Mr. Delaney,
Yes.
Ms. Rosedon,
Yes.
Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Ms. Virgin,
Yes.
Chairperson Patino,
Yes,
8 in favor.
thank you. So next is the master calendar. There are 2 cases on the master calendar, and they are removal cases. There's no presentation for removal cases. The cases are 59 Grand Street in Brooklyn, docket numbers LE0739, RG0218, and 224 North 7th Street in Brooklyn, docket number LE0740. Does anyone have any comments on this case?
I do have one comment. So I just wanted to note in the public session that case number 6, the names of the tenants of the 4th and 5th floors were corrected in a revised proposed order that is before you today.
Thank you. Is there a motion to accept these cases as revised? Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Rosalind. Mr. Vera, can you please pull the board members?
Mr. Bauer,
Yes.
Mr. Roach,
Yes.
Mr. Hilton,
Yes.
Mr. Delaney,
Yes.
Ms. Rosedon,
Yes.
Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Ms. Virgin,
Yes.
Chairperson Patino,
Yes,
8 in favor.
thank you. Are there any comments? Yes?
Just one request, before we adjourn, I wonder if we could get an update from Mr. Barrowitz in the Soho NoHo discussion.
Mr. Bowers?
There was a second meeting at the Supreme Court with a judge for those representing the Soho NoHo Alliance and the City of New York. And there was a meeting a month ago, and the lawyers went into the judge's chambers for about 20 minutes. This Tuesday, the lawyers went into the judge's chambers for about an hour and a half. And when they came out, we were told by the Soho NoHo Alliance lawyers that the city and the alliance had come to some kind of agreement, and that most likely there would not be a trial on the city is suing, the alliance is suing the city, and there won't be a trial. But once again, the judge has put off for 2 other meetings, one at sometime in May and the other early June. So I would suppose by early June the whole thing would be resolved unless somebody, unless some of the lawyers change their mind from now until then. But it was good to know that that some kind of agreement has taken place. One of the critical aspects is that there is a proposal that if a household in a loft where the primary person or persons are legitimate artists, if they sell it to non-artists, $100 a square foot has to go into some kind of fund, which is undetermined. And one of the absurdities, as far as I'm concerned, of that is that if a loft is worth $800,000, it's $100 a square foot. And if it's worth $8 million, which some are, it's still $100 a square foot. So I think that has to get resolved. And I think once that gets resolved, the whole thing will tend to disappear. This has been going on, by the way, for well over 5 years. And in the beginning, very good members of the city of New York wanted to produce low-cost housing in Soho and NoHo, while at the same time the city had realized that there are practically no vacant spaces, there are 2 small vacant lots in Soho. NoHo's a little different consideration. There's also an AIR ruling, so you can only build a building so high anyway. So any additional housing would have to go on top of some of the loft buildings, but some of the loft buildings are not, you can't really build on top of it. The buildings are not strong enough. So I think this whole thing started essentially because the former councilwoman for Lower Manhattan somehow decided that there should be a change in Soho and NoHo. And of course, the general understanding is that there are a bunch of galleries there, and it's a sort of really great place to go shop and walk around and go look at art, and that it must be, people living there must be all very, very wealthy. And the fact of the matter is that there are many artists there. As we know from the past, when those buildings were legalized in Soho and NoHo, the rents were incredibly inexpensive. And because that's how they started out. In the first meeting that I attended some 5.5 years ago at a public school in Chinatown, I don't think that there were anybody that showed up that was under the age of 50. And the city just hasn't quite acknowledged that a great deal of the tenants in Soho and NoHo are somewhat older people. And when I went to this Supreme Court meeting on Tuesday, once again, almost everybody was sitting there with gray hairs. I spoke to one of the lawyers, and they said the city is just beginning to realize, you know, who makes up the people in Soho and NoHo. And of course, one of these days, we're all going to die out, and then maybe the situation will change.
What an upbeat report. Thank you.
Thank you. So that will conclude our April 20, 2023 Loft Board meeting. Our next public meeting is scheduled to be held on May 18, 2023.